Hello everyone, I'm Marilyn, a regular 27-year-old woman who got more than she bargained for. I was just another number cruncher until my life took an unexpected turn a few years ago. This is my story. No frills, just the raw deal. It all started when I changed jobs and joined this new company as an accountant. That's when Mark entered the picture. He was a confident, charismatic salesman with a smile that could sell ice to Eskimos. When I first saw him, I found it hard to believe that this guy could ever fail to sell something. He was literally the living embodiment of salesmanship. It was his element, his world. We ran into each other in the break room. I was standing by the coffee machine, trying to get myself a cup, but the machine decided it wasn't going to work for some reason. That's when he showed up. "Hey, you're the new accountant, right?" he said, casually leaning against the doorframe, a mischievous grin on his lips. He was so laid back that I couldn't help but feel a little uneasy, though I tried to maintain my composure. "I'm Marilyn," I replied, but deep down I already knew he had caught my interest. I could say it was his confidence or charisma that drew me in, but it was something more. "And you?" "I'm Mark, head of sales and unofficial local coffee machine whisperer," he said with such charm that I couldn't help but laugh. We both smiled, and from that day on, it seemed like some invisible thread immediately connected us. Mark was the kind of guy who could turn the most mundane encounter into something bright. He was impulsive, full of ideas, and always had something new in mind. 2 years later, he stunned me again. He planned the most romantic proposal imaginable. A weekend getaway to the beach, a sunset dinner, and there he was, kneeling. It felt like a scene out of a Hollywood movie, and without hesitation, I said yes. Our wedding was something completely different, nothing loud, just exactly what I wanted, beautiful, heartfelt, yet fleeting like a dream. We started our married life in a house I inherited from my grandfather. This old, charming place with its own special character had always been a cozy corner for me. I loved it for the atmosphere, for the history it held within its walls. Mark and I settled in, and everything seemed perfect, until one evening he proposed an idea that would change my life. "Babe, have you ever thought about taking a break from work? You know, being a housewife for a while?" Mark said, sitting next to me, his eyes full of hope. It was so unexpected that I felt a jolt of surprise. A housewife? I had always been passionate about my career, and the thought seemed strange to me. I couldn't understand how this could even be a serious suggestion. I replied, trying not to let my voice reveal the confusion. "But, Mark, I've always worked. I love my job. It's a part of who I am." "I get it, Marilyn, but listen. Everything's fine here, I've got stability at work, we can afford it. Just think about it, no more stress, just focus on us, maybe even start a family soon," he said, reaching for my hand. His words were so sincere that I felt his enthusiasm starting to influence me. It felt like something plausible, and his confidence was so contagious that I couldn't just dismiss his proposal. And so, despite my better judgment, I agreed. Why not shake things up a bit, start fresh from the beginning? The first few weeks were something new. I had time to do things I never had time for before: gardening, reading, trying new recipes. The whole routine was slow-paced, without external pressure, as if I had suddenly found myself in another world, where the main goal was to find balance and peace. The house became cozier, and Mark would come home to a clean house with dinner on the table. We spent evenings talking about our future, making plans, laughing. It felt like an extended honeymoon, some ideal picture of family life. But over time, I began to feel my usual confidence slowly fading. I missed the challenges of my job, the sense of standing on the front lines, solving complex problems. I even missed the annoying buzz of the office phone, the calls that inevitably led to something important. I suddenly realized I had time, but no fulfillment. The inner restlessness grew stronger, but I kept pushing those feelings aside, convincing myself it was just an adjustment period. However, gradually something started to change. Mark's compliments about how great the house looked or how delicious the dinner was began to turn into expectations. He started making offhand remarks if dinner was late, or if the house wasn't as clean as he'd like. Those words, with just a hint of irritation, hurt me more than I could have imagined. He had always been gentle and supportive, but now I started to feel how the partnership was turning more and more into a duty. I was no longer a wife. I felt like a servant, living in the house. At that moment, I decided to talk to Laura, my best friend. I remember calling her one evening, trying to vent, though I wasn't entirely sure what I was going to say. I admitted to her that I felt like I was losing part of myself. Laura, as always, was there for me, her voice both concerned and supportive. "Marilyn, you're a firework. Don't let this housewife role snuff out your spark," she said, and I could feel her words gradually clearing my thoughts. She was right. I had always prided myself on my independence, my ability to walk my own path. But now I felt like I was losing myself, playing a role I never thought I'd play. But, to be honest, I thought I had it all figured out. I thought I would be happy in this new chapter of my life. How wrong I was. One evening, when I seemed to be getting myself together, Mark came home with an unusual expression on his face. He looked serious, almost tense, which was completely out of character for him. "Marilyn, we need to talk," he said, not even taking off his coat. I immediately felt that something was wrong. "What happened?" "You look like you've seen a ghost," I joked, trying to lighten the mood. But he didn't smile, like he usually would. "It's my parents," he said, avoiding my gaze. "Their apartment is under renovation, and they need somewhere to stay for a couple of weeks." I froze, realizing this wasn't just a simple piece of news, it was something more. "Well, okay, a couple of weeks," I replied, though inside, I felt a mixture of emotions. Mark nodded and added, "I know this may not be ideal, but trust me, it's only for a short time. It won't be so bad." I sighed, feeling a bit uneasy, but I agreed anyway. It was necessary, and I knew I couldn't say no. We were both in this together. A couple of days later, Mark's parents, Bob and Linda, arrived. And so, instead of the calm, cozy home I was used to, I was faced with something completely different. Their things filled every space, and the house I had always considered my own turned into a storage unit. I could barely move between boxes, bags, and furniture, and honestly, it felt incredibly overwhelming. Linda squeezed past me, carrying a box that seemed to contain her entire life. "Marilyn, darling, make some room, we've got a lot of stuff," she said with a light smile, as if it was the most normal thing in the world. Bob followed behind, dragging a giant armchair. "I hope you don't mind that we brought a little bit of comfort from home," he grumbled as he squeezed the armchair through the door. Our cozy home had become unrecognizable overnight. Everywhere I looked, their things were scattered, and it felt like each corner contained a piece of their lives. It was overwhelming, to say the least. And this was just the beginning. Bob and Linda wasted no time settling in, acting as though they owned the place. This wasn't just a temporary visit, it felt more like an occupation, as if they had no intention of leaving. Without waiting for me to process the situation, Bob immediately took over the TV. He flipped through the channels like it was his house, his personal territory. I wanted to shout at him, tell him to stop, but I just silently watched. I held back, telling myself it was only for a couple of weeks, that everything would go back to normal. But then came Linda. Linda, who started rearranging my kitchen. My place. The place where I spent hours cooking for Mark, experimenting with new recipes, doing everything with love. But Linda didn't seem to care about my feelings. She spun the plates around, moved the pots, placed the cups wherever it was convenient for her. I walked over to her, trying to remain calm, though inside I was boiling with anger. Linda, what are you doing? I asked, feeling my heart beat faster. She didn't even look at me. Oh, just tidying up, darling. Making it a little better, you know how it is, she replied, not even pausing her rearranging in my kitchen. I bit my tongue, remembering that this was only temporary. But the fire inside me was already burning. I was furious. This was my home, and they were treating it like a personal resort. I tried not to show my irritation, but it leaked out with every word. When it came time for dinner, things got even worse. I made the usual grilled chicken salad, trying to maintain our usual diet. But Linda looked at her plate with an expression as if I had served her not food, but some kind of rabbit food. What is this? It looks like rabbit food, she scoffed, pushing the plate aside. I felt my ears burn with embarrassment and frustration. Mom, come on, Marilyn worked hard on this, Mark said, trying to intervene and defend me. But Linda just waved her hand dismissively. No, let's just order pizza. I need real food. Without waiting for my response, Bob had already picked up the phone and ordered pizza, as if my food didn't even deserve attention. It all happened so quickly that I didn't even have time to say anything. I felt like my place in this house, as a woman and a homemaker, was slipping away. My efforts, my hard work, were losing all value. I felt not just insignificant, but as though I had no right to my own space. That night, I lay in bed next to Mark, who was snoring, oblivious to my inner struggle. In his world, I was just background noise. In his world, his parents mattered far more than I did. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was a stranger in my own home, that I had become just a bystander in someone else's play. But that was just the beginning. The next day, once again, Linda decided to take over my kitchen, this time with an avocado toast. I was peacefully preparing it, as usual, when she walked in and immediately made a face, as if she had smelled something unpleasant. What are you eating? This is bird food, she sneered, rummaging through the fridge. It's avocado toast, Linda, I replied, trying to keep my composure. It's healthy. But Linda just shook her head. Healthy? You need real food, girl. Let me make you some scrambled eggs with bacon. She pushed me aside, taking my breakfast from me as though I had no right to my own preferences. I stood there, literally boiling with anger. It was obvious she didn't respect my choice, didn't consider my space or my food important. I could feel each of her actions chipping away at me. At that moment, I realized she wasn't going to stop. Meanwhile, Bob was continuing his reign. In our living room, he made himself completely at home, turning it into his personal lounge. One evening, when I wanted to watch my favorite show, Bob was already sitting on the couch, engrossed in a loud action movie. I hesitantly approached, holding the remote control in my hands. Bob, do you mind if I watch my show? It's the season finale, I asked, hoping he'd understand. He didn't even look at me, continuing to watch his film. No, Marilyn, I'm watching this. Find something else to do, he replied, not tearing his eyes away from the screen. I stood there, gripping the remote, unable to believe my ears. In my own living room, I was treated like an unwelcome guest. I turned around and quickly left the room, feeling like the ground was slipping from beneath me. Everything I had considered mine now belonged to others. The next day, another moment pushed me to my breaking point. I discovered that Linda had decided to work on my closet. It was my closet, my personal belongings. When I walked in and saw her moving my things around, assessing and discarding clothes, I lost it. What the hell? Linda, those are my personal things. I shouted, losing control for the first time. She didn't even acknowledge my outburst. Oh, relax, Marilyn. I'm just making room for our stuff. I've got things too, she said, tossing aside my favorite clothes like they were trash. I felt a storm rise up inside me. This whole house had become foreign. And then Mark walked in. He looked confused, not knowing how to react to the situation. I stood there in complete disbelief, holding Linda's bank card, which I had just found in her purse. When Mark asked what was going on, I couldn't hold back my anger. "Mom, maybe you should ask Marilyn before you move her things," he said, but his tone was so indecisive that I almost didn't notice any real support in it. He stood there like a statue, unsure of whom to defend. Okay, I was just trying to help," Linda said, her voice filled with fake irritation, as if I was at fault for having my own personal things. She turned and left the room, leaving me with a bitter feeling in my chest. I could feel all my anger and resentment building up, ready to explode. Mark didn't immediately grasp the seriousness of the situation. He turned to me, trying to find the right words to calm me down. "Marilyn, can't you just let it go? They're just trying to fit in," he said, attempting to justify their behavior. But I couldn't understand that. This wasn't just fitting in. This was an invasion, a violation of boundaries, disrespect. I couldn't take it anymore. "Mark, this is our home, not theirs." My voice rose, and despite my efforts to stay composed, it became hard to hide my anger. But Mark seemed completely unfazed. He looked like someone who was fully on his mother's side. I felt something inside me snap. My belief that we were a team, that our home was a place where we both could be ourselves, was crumbling. He said, "Just hang in there a little longer, okay?" I stood there, feeling lost. My home had become foreign, and I wasn't sure anymore if I had a place in this life, in this home, with this person. I tried to forget how I was feeling, but it was impossible. Weeks passed, and the tension in the house reached its peak. I couldn't stay silent any longer. My patience had run out. One night, during dinner, when we were again discussing trivial things, I gathered the courage to ask the one question that couldn't wait any longer. "When are you two planning to move back to your apartment?" I asked, the question that had been gnawing at me all week. That was it. I couldn't take this constant compromise anymore. But their answer shocked me. They just laughed. "Move back? Why would we do that?" Linda said, exchanging a look with Mark. "We decided to stay. It's much better here." I felt the cold pierce through me. It was a blow, but I held myself together. Bob added, "Yeah, Mark doesn't want to spend money on rent for us. Why not stay here? It's convenient." I turned my gaze to Mark, searching for some kind of explanation. But he avoided my eyes, as if there was not a single ounce of empathy in him. And then, right in front of me, he said, "Yeah, Marilyn, there's no point in renting when we have space here." It felt as though the world had collapsed at that moment. My home, my fortress, my place where I could be myself, had now become foreign. I sat at the table, stunned and confused. My husband, with whom I had been through so much, with whom we had built our life, was now telling me that his parents would be living with us forever. My heart tightened with pain. How could he make such a decision so easily? How could it be that his parents were more important than me? Everything I knew and believed to be right now felt shattered, like someone had pulled the rug out from under me. I couldn't believe I had ended up in this situation, in a house that was mine but no longer was, surrounded by people I should have considered family but had now become strangers. Just when I thought it couldn't get worse, they did it. One day, I decided to go for a run to clear my head and calm down. Everything had been so tense lately, and I could no longer just sit at home trying to avoid thinking about what was happening around me. But luck was not on my side. I tripped over a stone that had decided to settle right in the middle of the path and fell. The pain was instant and sharp, as though someone had clamped my leg in a vice. I knew I had broken it, and it was clear I wouldn't be getting any help. Hobbling, I almost crawled back home. Every step felt like a jolt to my nerves. But the worst was waiting for me back at the house. When I entered the living room, I saw Mark and his parents comfortably settled on the couch, talking and laughing as if nothing was happening. I held back tears, but I couldn't hide the pain in my voice. "Mark, I think I broke my leg. I need to go to the hospital." He looked up with irritation, as if I was interrupting some important part of their conversation. "What now?" he asked, his voice strained, as if I were an insignificant part of his life. Linda, without wasting any time, chimed in with her usual cold tone. "Oh, stop dramatizing, Marilyn. It's probably just a sprain." But I knew it wasn't. My leg was burning with pain, and I could barely stand. My words were heavy, filled with desperation. "No, this really hurts. I need help." I felt the room start to spin around me from pain and exhaustion. Bob, sitting in the chair, had just laughed. "You shouldn't be running around like a teenager," he said, with contempt. "You brought this on yourself." I couldn't believe my ears. Didn't they see I was in pain? Was this cruelty, pretense, or something else? I screamed inside, but Mark still didn't notice. His face was one of discomfort, not concern. "Fine, I'll take you, but this better not be another excuse to avoid housework," he said, getting up from his chair, but his words did nothing to calm me. It felt like the light was dimming, as if I were losing the last connection I had to this house. At the hospital, it was confirmed that my leg was broken. The next weeks were pure hell. I was stuck at home on crutches, unable to move the way I needed, unable to do simple tasks. And throughout all this, I was told I had to work, I had to be useful. But Mark and his parents acted as though nothing had changed. They continued to expect me to cook and clean as if I were perfectly healthy. One day, I tried to prepare lunch, balancing on my crutches. The pain was unbearable, but I stubbornly tried. Linda walked in and saw me struggling. Her face showed no compassion or regret. "Can't you do this faster?" "We're hungry," she said, not offering the slightest help. I held back my boiling irritation, but I couldn't keep up the facade any longer. "I'm doing the best I can on one leg, Linda." My words came out louder than I expected. But she didn't even think twice. Coldly, with a scornful look, she replied, "Well, it's not enough. You're incredibly lazy." Mark entered the kitchen and immediately noticed the situation. "What's going on here?" he asked, first looking at his mother, then at me. "Your wife is taking forever to make lunch." As if she's using her injury as an excuse. Linda immediately filed her complaint, repeating her words about how I wasn't trying. With each of her words, I felt worse. I stood there, gritting my teeth, trying not to break down. And then Mark, instead of standing up for me, just shrugged and left the kitchen without giving me a second glance. Well, I thought, things couldn't possibly get worse. But it turned out they could. A few weeks after my injury, Linda and Bob announced they were going to celebrate Thanksgiving at our house, and even more shockingly, they were inviting their relatives. I was stunned. I could barely move with crutches, and they were planning to host a holiday at my house. How am I supposed to handle this? I asked, trying to hold back my anger. How do you expect me to host people when I'm on crutches? Linda just waved her hand, as if it didn't matter. "Oh, you won't have to do much, just don't get in the way. We'll take care of it." I felt my anger boiling. This is my home. My home, not theirs. I exploded. "Linda, you can't just invite people without asking me first." And then Mark stepped in, as always, with his dry, indifferent tone. "Marilyn, it's just a family gathering. Let's not make a big deal out of this," Mark said, as if he had just uttered some kind of saving motto that was supposed to resolve all the difficulties and disagreements. His words sounded mechanical, like something he had learned by heart. I felt a wave of anger rising inside me. Big deal, I repeated in my head, clenching my fists. Wasn't this a big deal? I could barely move, yet you decided that your parents would take over our home for a party? I couldn't stay silent any longer. My voice cracked, and I exhaled sharply. Bob will step in, Mark continued. We thought it would be nice to gather the whole family here. After all, we all live under the same roof now. His words sounded as though I should be thrilled that this large family gathering would take place at our house. I was starting to lose my patience when Linda suddenly dropped her bombshell. Actually, Marilyn, she said, her tone icy and calm, we thought it would be better if you stayed somewhere else for a couple of weeks. With your leg and everything, you'll just get in the way. I stared at her, completely stunned. Stay somewhere else? In my own house? This wasn't just stupidity, it was an insult. How could they talk about me so calmly as if I were an unwanted guest in my own home? You want me to leave my house so you can have a party here? I could feel the anger boiling in my chest. I couldn't believe what was happening. Linda just shrugged, as if nothing serious was happening. Yes, Marilyn, for a couple of weeks. It will be for the best, she continued, as though she were doing me a favor. Mark intervened, trying to sound like the voice of reason. Marilyn, it's just for a short time. It will be easier for everyone. I couldn't hold back anymore. This is my home. Why should I back down? Why should I leave my life behind and pretend this is normal? I cut him off, not holding back my fury. This is my house, Mark. I'm not going anywhere. He looked at me with disappointment, but his face immediately hardened, turning cold and detached. We thought you'd appreciate not having to deal with the stress of the holidays, Bob added, with an expression that suggested this was the most reasonable solution in the world. Unable to take it any longer, I screamed, feeling the fire in my chest. Get out, both of you, get out of my house, right now. Mark turned pale, his face flushed, but he held back his fury. He probably thought I would calm down. But I couldn't calm down. I felt like I was losing control, like I couldn't keep being the silent shadow in this house any longer. He had never valued me, my needs, or my space. Now, I couldn't stay silent. Marilyn, you're being unreasonable, Mark said, but his voice was already trembling from the tension. They're my parents. You can't just kick them out. That's unreasonable. I was barely holding back tears, but I stood there, like a stone wall. I almost shouted. They are taking over my house, Mark. And you're letting them. You allowed it. Mark's face became rigid, his eyes cold. His next question stunned me. If you don't respect my parents, maybe we shouldn't be together. Is that what you want? A divorce? Those words sounded like a verdict, like a blow to the heart. I felt my strength and emotions collapse at once, but at the same time, a strange surge of confidence washed over me. Don't give up. Don't hold back. You can do this. Without a word, I went to the table and pulled out a folder with papers. It was a divorce file I had prepared in advance, just in case things didn't go well. Just in case they continued to humiliate me. Mark looked at me in confusion, his face twisted with disbelief. What is this? He asked, taking the documents. His voice was trembling, but in his eyes, there was something scary. Fear. And maybe pity. I silently watched as he opened the papers, slowly read them, and then looked back at me. Are you serious? Are you really going to go through with this? His voice was hoarse, and he waited in horror for my answer. Yes, I replied calmly, in a voice I barely recognized. I'll go through with it. I won't let you humiliate me in my own home. Not you, not anyone else. Mark stood there, not knowing what to say. Linda and Bob, who had not said a word to me until then, fell silent, like statues. Only silence filled the room, as if I were their punishment. Finally, Mark signed the papers, his hand trembling, and his face showed an expression as though he had been punched in the stomach. He stood still for a moment, then, with a cold glance, he said, "You'll regret this, Marilyn. You won't even be able to support yourself without me." I looked at him, not saying a word. My body was tense, but my heart felt a sense of relief. It was freedom. "I'll manage." Those words were spoken with such effort that I had to literally push them out through my clenched teeth. My voice was barely audible, like a weak but determined whisper in this empty house. Mark shrugged, as if he were saying goodbye to something not worth it. "Your loss," he said, and with that cold, indifferent gesture, he and his parents gathered their things, as if packing for a long trip, not paying any attention to me. I stood in the hallway, watching them leave, leaving behind not just empty suitcases, but shattered hopes. It was over. My marriage ended the moment the door closed behind them. And at that moment, when the last sound echoed dully in the emptiness, I felt a strange sense of peace. Yes, I was alone. But maybe this was the best alternative to the constant tension, threats, and disrespect I had endured all these years. The first thing I did, without a second thought, was change the locks. It wasn't just a practical step. It was almost symbolic. It felt like I was protecting my personal fortress, my territory, which no one had the right to seize. I didn't realize at the time how important this decision was for me, but it was decisive. I chose my side. Thanksgiving came faster than I expected. I was still adjusting to my new reality, finding comfort in the silence, in my own company. The time I had once spent in stress and anticipation was now filled with peace and calm, the things I had long been missing. But the peace didn't last. As soon as I got lost in my thoughts, there was a knock at the door. I went to open it, and my heart tightened a little when I saw Mark, his parents, and a whole crowd of their relatives standing on the doorstep. They stood there as if nothing had happened, ready to celebrate. "What are you doing here?" I asked, almost stunned, not believing my eyes. "We're here for Thanksgiving, Marilyn. Did you think we wouldn't come?" Mark said with that same smug expression I disliked so much. That was the last straw. I couldn't hold myself back anymore. My voice was full of fury, and I couldn't believe they still dared to come into my house. "You're not welcome here anymore, Mark. This is my house, and you're not my family. Not yours, not what you want." I spat out, not noticing how my words grew sharper. Linda, as though not understanding the seriousness of the situation, spoke with a smirk. "Oh, come on, Marilyn, don't be so petty. Let's just have a nice dinner." I stood my ground, like a stone wall, not yielding to any persuasion. My voice was firm. "No, you need to leave, now." Mark just laughed, his laugh cold, and his words just as cruel. "You can't kick us out. This was our family home." But I wasn't the woman who would give in anymore. I was changing. "Not anymore, Mark," I said, feeling strength building in my chest. "I've changed the locks. You forfeit all rights to this house when you signed those papers." Silence fell. Mark stood there, fists clenched, his face red with anger. He couldn't believe I had made this decision. "Fine, have it your way," he said, and everyone turned to leave. After they left, I sat in my living room, realizing that I was once again the mistress of my life. It wasn't easy, but I felt a sense of relief. I was starting to rebuild my life, step by step, and though it was difficult, it was mine, and that meant more than anything else. A few weeks later, when I had started to recover a little, sitting in my silence, in my newfound reality, Laura came to visit. She entered the house with the same expressive gaze as always. "Hey, Marilyn, how are you holding up?" she asked, her eyes already scanning the room. She was more observant than I had expected. "Actually, I'm doing well," I replied, smiling. It was easy to be with her, and I felt like I was starting over. Laura looked at me closely, with intensity. "You seem different, stronger." "Kind of," she remarked, squinting her eyes. I smiled, feeling strength growing inside me. "Yeah, I guess shedding the excess baggage does that to you," I replied, and we both laughed, just like old times. In that moment, I felt a lightness return to my life, as if I had shed tons of weight and unnecessary worries. But Laura didn't let me off with a light-hearted joke. She shifted to a more serious question. "Seriously, Marilyn, what's next? What are you going to do?" I took a deep breath, gathering my thoughts. "I'm going back to work. I've already started looking for an accounting job," I said, a little nervous, but deep inside I felt strong. "I won't lie, it's a bit scary, but it's time to get back on my feet." Laura nodded, her words sincere. "That's what you've always been the smartest at in the office. They're lucky you stood by them." I fell for support, and it was like a warm blanket, giving me confidence. I was ready to face the world again, on my own terms, with no pretensions or dependence. I was starting a new chapter, not looking back. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of interviews, and gradually, I got back into the rhythm of life. I landed a great position at a local firm, and for the first time in a long time, I felt excitement about the future. My house was mine again. My life was mine again. I had survived the worst and come out stronger.